The begrudging or surrogate parental figure is one of the most heartwarming tropes in storytelling in general. How can you not love seeing somebody who is grizzled and hardened to the world meeting this younger individual who begins to open them up to create a bond like parent and child that then begins to bring them closer together and teaches them both about the world? It is one of the best tropes and exceedingly difficult to play in TTRPGs. Now, one of the best examples I could think of for this is Joel from The Last of Us, but there are more examples out there. Another prime example is Piccolo and Gohan from Dragon Ball Z. That being said, the trope is difficult. The archetype in general is difficult to play because it requires two different people to be on board with it, and it requires you both to understand what you're hoping to get out of it. See, the reason it's difficult to communicate that with another individual is you both have to understand a few different things. One, why do these two characters want that type of relationship? Two, why do they push back against that type of relationship? And three, what hangups in the past caused this between them? More often than not, when you look at this trope, you see it like this. You see a begrudging father figure who more than likely at one point has lost a child and has therefore become hardened to allowing themselves to care about somebody again. They then get introduced to a very competent but annoying young individual who they then have to take care of for one reason or another that they don't want to, and over the course of the story, they begin to soften that hardened individual's heart, and eventually the two begin to create a bond. Then later down the line, the child gets into danger, and the father then has to truly decide if this is something they want, if they care about this individual enough to put their own life on the line. And then from there, well, the story kind of tells itself. Now let's keep in mind that TTRPGs are an improvised type of game, which means, well, it's going to be really difficult to set all those things up, but it's not difficult to keep an eye out for them. The first thing you're going to want to do, especially if playing the begrudging father, is you have to keep in mind, why are you begrudging? What has hardened your heart and kept you from wanting to care about another individual this much? Now, please, please keep in mind that while this is something that you need to figure out, if you don't figure it out, all you're going to come across as is grumpy and irritating and rude. And no one's going to want to try and create a relationship between characters about that. So this really is a crucial part. In the case of Joel, obviously, spoilers if you haven't seen any of the story. In fact, I would probably just not watch this video because I'm probably going to spoil quite a bit. But in the case of Joel, he just cares a lot because he once lost his daughter. And so when Ellie comes around, it's hard not to feel, well, the same sort of things he felt towards his daughter. He watched his daughter die and it was horrible and terrible. And now there's Ellie. There's Ellie, and he doesn't want to get hurt again, but he can see the parallels between her and his daughter. And in the case of Piccolo, like I mentioned earlier, well, it's kind of the same thing, sort of. Piccolo never had a kid. However, he never got to know his father because, well, he's kind of a clone of his father, or at least an offshoot. He's a different slug piece of his father. Point is, his father died and created Piccolo. That's what you really need to know. And so, in the case of Gohan, with Gohan no longer having his dad around, part of him empathizes with that, relates with it. And that's what sort of helps create that bond between them. But we're not talking about Dragon Ball today, we're focusing on Joel. And Joel does have that feeling within him. So when you're trying to figure out what your character went through that made them so jaded, probably more than likely it's going to be a relationship, either one that they lost, one that they never had, or one that they deeply wish they could have had. Something like that. I could easily see you making it some sort of situation where you were almost a father, but your character was never able to actually be a father, and now they long for that, but at the same time, they don't want to have that relationship with a kid that isn't their own. I think that could be an interesting way to go about it. But thinking about that is one of the most important parts. But then two, you have to make sure the relationship with the other character is set out well. And really, there tends to be a catalyst for this type of archetype. Like I mentioned, there's something that's going to happen that's going to put the child in danger that then causes the father figure to have to choose, is this worth it to them? Is this something they're going to put themselves on the line for? And it can be difficult in TTRPGs, but not impossible. Despite it being an improv setting, you'd be surprised at how often this happens, especially in combat scenarios. It doesn't matter what's going on. At the point where you decide that you want to make this movement in the story, this moment happen, just wait for who's ever playing the child character to have them be in danger in one way or another. It could be taking some damage, taking a hit, something like that, and then have your character do something that might not be optimal, but is protective. Run forward and make sure that your character is now in between the enemy who harmed your child, or at least your would-be child. Or make sure that you do something that is blatantly dangerous to you to protect them. It doesn't just have to be putting yourself in between the enemies. You could jump off a cliff if they fell off the cliff. Anything where they might be in danger, have your character very clearly put yourself in that danger to protect them, and that will make that moment clear you're making this decision to care about this kid. Now, in order for all of this kind of stuff to work, you're gonna have to make sure that stakes actually go well into the story. Otherwise, what are you protecting the younger child from? That being said, there are ways of doing it, which I would like to introduce our sponsor for today, Crit Cards. Now, Crit Cards is an incredible Kickstarter that's currently going on that basically allows you to actually add influential damage to the characters so they can't just pop back up from death states for no reason, while still actually making it a dangerous situation. Crit Cards and the Doctor's Handbook are supplements to the Dungeons & Dragons game that add actual injuries without being super unfun. There's actually a lot in the Kickstarter that you can get, and so I would really recommend you just actually go look at the Kickstarter. But since there is so much, I'm going to read it verbatim for you because I actually constantly keep messing this up. So, the comprehensive set from the Kickstarter includes a deck of crit cards, the Doctor's Handbook, a DM screen, a playmat, blood dice, a leather dice tray, a leather dice bag, a leather doctor's bag, and they're all designed to enhance your gaming experience. So there's a lot you can get from this. Not only that, they have a ton of other things in there, such as different classes you can play for NPCs or PCs, so you can be a little bit more of the Doctor vibe, which D&D sorely lacks. It's mostly either magical healing or none at all. So please go check them out and give them their support. They've supported our channel, so I would love to be able to return it in kind. Anyways, back to Joel, Ellie, Piccolo, Gohan, whoever we were talking about. And it's really heartwarming. Like, honestly, we see this a ton of times in TV shows and media, and it's really, really heartwarming. It is such a heartstring puller, and I can't imagine doing it in TTRPGs would be any different. In fact, I've done this before. I have had NPCs who ended up being surrogate fathers in one way or another, and it never failed to just bring some sort of genuine joy and compassion and emotion to the story. It's an incredible tool. But this is only one part of it. Once you have decided that your character is going to be this surrogate father figure, what now? The story doesn't end there. Typically what ends up happening is your character becomes a little bit overbearing, and this is understandable, but I would avoid doing it in a TTRPG setting unless you have communicated with the other player that this is going to happen. Otherwise, it's just going to be annoying. Imagine you're playing Dungeons & Dragons and you're trying to get into combat, but every time you do something, the other player is just using their action to pick you up and take you away from the fight. That's not the purpose of the game. The purpose of the game is for you all to be heroes and fight, and so that would get annoying really, really fast, and would probably create some conflict at your table. So how do you circumvent this? What do you do to avoid that being a situation? Well, like I said, you communicate. You tell them, I think my character's gonna be a little bit overbearing. I don't want that to be a problem for you, but I would love to be called out on it, or I would love for our characters to have a fight on it. For some reason, there are a lot of people who have this weird aversion to trying to plan out specific things in TTRPG campaigns, and I don't totally think it's a problem. I understand why they have an issue with it. Because it's an improv game, why would you plan it out? It's not a scripted game. But communicating conflicts ahead of time, one, makes the improv much easier to go into. You have to understand that. Communicating ahead of time can improve the improv. Because if somebody's trying to start a fight with your character, but you didn't know it was gonna happen, part of you is just sitting there going, okay, so are you fighting with me? Do you have a problem with me? Is there some sort of real world conflict that's happening here? Or do we just understand from each other that maybe we're character fighting? It gets really difficult. And so you have to make sure that that's communicated out of game. If it is communicated out of game, hey, my character's probably gonna pick a fight with yours this session. When that happens, I can fully dive into the improv and I can play in character because I know this was planned. So planning things a little bit ahead of time can actually improve the improv if you do it well. And so talk with who's ever playing this surrogate child character and make sure it's communicated. I think it is also really fun to explore the themes of the child character actually being very competent, but the surrogate father figure will not allow them to be competent. That is a very fun story to explore, and the mechanics of the game can really back it up. Imagine your character is higher level than the rest, or just generally really well optimized. And then you have the surrogate father figure constantly trying to keep you from doing what your character is built to do. I mean, the mechanics will perfectly well support that entire narrative of, don't baby me, you're not my real dad. That is also a very fun trope, having that you're not my real dad moment. In fact, I played a Monster of the Week campaign where that moment happened, And my character had to bite his tongue because he actually is the character's real dad, but regardless, it is a fun trope to explore and have so much heart behind it. The begrudging father figure is so fun because it lets what is usually a very emotionally withdrawn character really show where their heart is, and it lets us all emotionally explore that with them, and I think it can be super fascinating, fun, and an amazing time at your table, so long as you've communicated properly. If you want to watch how to play more archetypes, I have a playlist right here that goes through my entire catalog. Go out into the world and make it your own. Anyways, back to Joel, Ellie, Piccolo, Gohan, whoever we were talking about.
Hey, sexy lady!
No.